Ooh, how about this one? It kind of goes in line with the Christian apologetics. Thomas and Andrew, how did they die and why does it matter? You guys want to hear about Thomas and Andrew? So, Foxe writes that Thomas and Andrew were executed as martyrs. However, there is some reason to possibly doubt that. Um, and we're going to look at it. So let's do that for our third build. Let's talk about Thomas and Andrew. They are two of the lesser known disciples of Jesus, of the 12 disciples or apostles. Thomas is probably most well known for his nickname Doubting Thomas, because he famously doubted the reports of the other disciples that Jesus had rose from the dead, and says, "If I do not touch his hands, his hands and his side, I will not believe that he has been raised from the dead." Right? However, let's be honest. How many people do you know came back to life? Right? That's an understandable doubt, right? If I watched someone die, and then days later, my friends came to me and said, "Hey, that guy that you were following came back to life," I might be a little doubtful, okay? I'm just going to be honest. I might think that they were smoking some pretty good stuff and they weren't sharing, right? And I think that's what Thomas was thinking, right? So, how did these two apostles die? And why should we care 2,000 years later? I'm just going to read my intro, okay? In here lies two questions that many have pondered and many still have glossed over as irrelevant. Some have argued that both were martyred for Christianity, such as John Foxe in Book of Martyrs. But is there good evidence for that? How do we know how they died, and what difference does it make? Many will talk about Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, John, or even Paul, but we're going to talk about Thomas and Andrew. Excuse me. So Andrew is going to be first. We're going to talk about Andrew first, mainly because, let's face it, Thomas gets probably more attention than Andrew. Andrew is Peter's younger brother. Yeah, how would you like that, right? Andrew is Peter's younger brother. Woohoo, yay, right? I'm the younger brother of the loudmouth. Oh, but Andrew is Peter's younger brother. And Peter comes to Jesus because of Andrew. Right? You can read about that in John chapter 1. Andrew also shows up in John chapter 6. He's the one who receives the boys' small lunch with the two loaves and the fish, feeding the 5,000. That's Andrew, who presents the little boy's lunch, and is like, "Hey, we've got this little lunch." He also shows up in Mark 13, along with Peter, James, and John, and he gets some private instruction about the end of days, or the end of time. Right? That to me reads like a little brother tagging along with his big bro more than anything else. And then Andrew is the one that Philip goes to concerning the Greeks in John chapter 12. All right, so Andrew is not well known. There's not a lot written about him. All right, so the rest of his life is not well known either, by the way. There's not a lot of evidence, archaeological evidence, or evidence from antiquity concerning the life of Andrew after the death and resurrection, a reported death and resurrection of Jesus. church tradition says that he went to Eurasia and also the Black Sea. I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, there is a writing outside the New Testament called the Acts of Andrew. It's considered apocryphal, and may or may not be legit. So in short, there's not a lot known about Andrew. However, McDowell and McDowell, which I referenced earlier with evidence, lists, I'm going to put it here, lists the claim of martyrdom by Andrew as having moderate probability. Church tradition holds that he was executed on an X-shaped cross known as the St. Andrew's Cross. Foxe agrees with this attestation. However, the reliability of the accounts can be suspicious. Okay. Hippolytus on the 12 from the 3rd century contained a similar and possibly independent tradition of it. In short, we don't have a lot of evidence one way or the other, and the evidence that we have saying he was martyred is suspicious. With Andrew, because we don't have a lot of evidence one way or the other, that leaves the question of the evidence that we have, is it reliable? And I don't know. I haven't really looked into it that much outside of this paper. But what I will say is I don't think it matters if he was martyred or not. Now, that may come as a shock to some, but some might not find that very shocking. But I don't think it matters. I think what is more important is whether or not we have evidence to believe he recanted in the face of difficulties. Okay? We have zero evidence that he recanted. We have every reason to believe that he did not recant, because all of the evidence says that he was steadfast. Now, why do I say it's problematic, that Acts of Andrew? Well, one, it has a lot of similarities with the Odyssey, which we know was fiction. Some of the records are pretty outlandishly ballsy. I don't know if that's a good way of putting it. They're fantastical. So that gives pause, and we don't have anything else that corroborates those fantastical elements. So there might be an element of truth in the account of the Acts of Andrew, but it's most likely Hippolytus's on the 12 from the 3rd century is probably more accurate. It doesn't have the outlandish fanciful Odyssey-esque elements, and simply records a more plausible, believable narrative on the death of Andrew. Okay, that's really all I have on Andrew, is those two things, and that's really all McDowell and McDowell have as well. But I am gonna put this here. I'm just gonna read it. However, McDowell and McDowell conclude, and I do as well, the fate of Andrew cannot be certain with the evidence at hand. I believe it is reasonable to conclude that Andrew never recanted from his faith, and possibly died for it, but the way Andrew died cannot be determined with any certainty. He could have died for being a Christian. He could have lived till he was an old age. To me, it doesn't matter, though, whether he died a martyr or he lived to old age. There's no evidence that says that he recanted, so that to me is very good evidence that he didn't recant, because we do have, like, all of what we do have on Andrew is that he did not recant. So, and it's probable that he did die a martyr, but how he died, that's pretty uncertain. So You have any questions about Andrew before I move on? Because there's really not a lot to talk about when it comes to Andrew. Andrew was the younger brother of Peter, and I think as a result, naturally speaking, Andrew gets the short end of the stick kind of thing. His older, more outspoken, more prominent brother gets a lot more attention. That would be Peter. And by the way, I'm the youngest of four, so we're all close in age. And my older brothers definitely got a lot more attention than I did. Simply because they were more outspoken and they were involved in things sooner than I was. And that's just how it works typically, right? The younger siblings tend to get outshined by their older ones. And in this case, we only have two brothers, Peter and Andrew. So it makes sense to me that Andrew would have been in Peter's shadow, because Peter was such a dominant force and a dominant personality in the first century that it would have been extremely difficult for Andrew to be known outside of Peter's shadow. Even with that, maybe that's one of the reasons why he goes to Eurasia to minister and doesn't stay in the Levant and doesn't go to Rome. We don't have any evidence that he went to Rome. We do have evidence that Peter went to Rome, and so did Paul, but Andrew doesn't. He goes to Eurasia. So what do you guys think about Andrew? Any comments, snide remarks, counter arguments? I'm okay with counter arguments, by the way. Just keep them respectful. If you do give a counter argument or a counter position, by all means give some link or reference so I can look into that counter argument more. I would be curious to know where that position comes from and look at the evidence for it. So I'm just going to put the cards on the table. I think I agree with Sean and Josh McDowell that martyrdom is plausible, was probably likely for Andrew. However, whether or not he died on an X-shaped cross specifically or not, I think that is doubtful. I think that might have been more of a theological description than a accurate historical description. But I think it's reasonable that he died a martyr, just probably not necessarily on an X-shaped cross. He might have just been simply executed.